Hey, and welcome. I'm Laura of Namasturm Yoga. Today, I'm going to talk about starting your own home yoga practice. So let's talk today a little bit about starting your own yoga practice at home. These days, anybody can practice yoga at home. There are a lot of online yoga classes that you can take for free or subscriptions that you can take. A lot of yoga studios are now offering classes online. And you can get some really professional classes with some really skilled instructors that way. If you want to take it to that next step of really starting your own practice where you guide the practice and you feel like you can come to that practice at any moment, you don't have to search through tons of videos to find exactly what you want because you can create it for yourself, then I wanted to help you with that. So this is for students who have been practicing yoga for a long period of time and already are familiar with poses and understand alignment. So you're not trying to learn something new so much as you are trying to maintain your own practice and do it in the way that you like. So I'm going to give you some tips as to how to get started creating your own home yoga practice beyond just practicing with instructors who teach online. The first tip I'm going to give you is do what you know. You've taken classes before. Your practice is probably going to resemble the practice of instructors that you've taken classes from, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. There's no reason why you can't use the sequencing that you're familiar with. Use poses that you do often in classes that you've taken before. If there's things that you're familiar with, those are going to come the most easily to you, and it's going to make it a lot easier to establish your own practice if you don't try to completely reinvent the wheel to do this. My second tip is do what you like. Do what you love. I think in every yoga class, there are always a few poses that you're like, oh, I hate this pose. Well, you don't have to do those in your own home yoga practice. I'm not saying you shouldn't ever. You certainly can and you may. But if you're just getting started, wouldn't it be more exciting to show up at your mat knowing that the poses you do are all going to be the poses that you love, that you can fill your practice with sequences that you enjoy, that feel good to you, and that just feel right in your body. So do what you like. Allow yourself to be challenged and do some of the harder, tougher, more difficult stuff when you are taking a class that an instructor is leading for you. And then the third tip I want to give you is listen to your body. In a class, the instructor is offering guidance for everyone in the room, everyone taking the class. It's not geared specifically towards you. When you are giving yourself your own home yoga practice, that practice is geared towards you specifically. So how's your energy feeling that day? What parts of your body want to move? What ones need a little attention? Listen to your body and follow that as a guidance as to what to do next. The other side of that is be safe. So if something feels wrong to you, or you feel too tired to practice, or you feel too tired to do the more vigorous, challenging poses that you often do in classes, listen to your body, be safe, be careful, and really let that also guide your practice. A yoga practice doesn't have any rights or wrongs. So literally getting out your mat and doing 2 poses and calling it a day, that's a yoga practice. There's nothing wrong with that. But for people who are trying to create their own yoga practice and they want something a little bit more than just a pose or 2, I want to offer you a little bit of structure so that maybe you have an outline that you can follow as you start to create your own practices at home. This is actually going to be part 1 in this series. It's really only going to be a 2-part series, but today I'm going to talk about structure, and then the next part I'm going to talk about sequencing. So structure of a yoga practice, I think we can kind of break it into about 3 parts as a whole. So we have a warm-up portion of our practice, We have sort of the middle portion of our practice in which we do a lot of our standing poses and start to get into some deeper variations on some things. And then we have finishing poses. So if you want to create a complete practice for yourself, I would suggest trying to kind of go through that arc of warm-ups, standing poses where we get a little bit more vigorous, and then finishing poses, which is generally where we come to our mat and do some quieter, deeper stretches once we've warmed up. A warm-up to your practice could include something like a simple cat-cow stretch. Or you could start from a seated position and take some spinal flexion there. I think warming up the spine is a great way to begin your practice because you check in with how you're feeling. The spine moves in multiple ways though, so we can also twist the spine from seated. From cat-cow, you could take a leg out and take the arm up and open it. And then we can also side stretch the body. So from seated, you could take an arm up and over. Make sure you do both sides. Once we've done some real early warm-ups, which basically are just waking up our body, specifically our spine, our shoulders, maybe our neck, we can start to add in our legs. So maybe moving into a plank pose. Downward facing dog, although a core of almost any yoga practice, is also a great pose to do early on. We can warm up our legs in down dog and really stretch out and elongate our torso, our spine, our arms, wake up those hands and wrists. And then although we did some spinal flexion perhaps in cat-cow stretches, we also want to make sure we do a small back bend early on in our practice, especially if we're planning to do sun salutations, because those include back bending. So maybe a sphinx pose, or you could take a cobra pose for a few breaths. Now legs. If you want to warm up the legs in a more simple way before we get into the deeper, more strengthening standing poses, maybe take a simple low lunge, taking one foot forward with the knee over the ankle. Let the back knee rest on the floor. You can keep your hands on the ground or bring your upper body up if you want more of a stretch. Make sure to take both sides. Down dog split is also a great way to warm up the legs by reaching them up into the air. And then finally, a standing forward fold is probably a really important warm-up, especially before we go into something like sun salutations. Now, if you have a short time for practice or you don't feel like doing any sun salutations, that's totally fine. At this point, you could go straight into standing poses. But if you would like a more vigorous warm-up, a more vigorous practice, and you enjoy flowing with the breath, give yourself a chance to take 1 to 5 or even more sun salutations. And honestly, a practice made up of just sun salutations would be a great yoga practice. If you don't have a lot of time in your day, spend 10 minutes in sun salutations. You'd be surprised at how much of a workout you'll get and your whole body is connecting. Sun salutations, because of their repetitive nature, also can have a very meditative quality. So this might be a great core for a lot of practices. Once we've decided to move to the heart of our practice, and this could last an hour or it could maybe just last 5 or 10 minutes, we're going to focus on standing poses and variations of standing poses. Some very basic standing poses include things like Warrior 1, Warrior 2, extended side angle, reverse warrior, and triangle pose. Even if you only do a few poses in a practice, these are some great core poses to include. Variations would include things like pyramid pose, revolve triangle. You could take a high lunge crescent pose and turn that into a revolve pose. You could take a warrior one, take the arms behind your back and move it into a humble warrior. These are variations that you can play with if you have time, if you have the inclination. Once we've done some standing poses, we can move our standing poses towards standing balance poses, which is a separate category of poses, although there is admittedly some overlap. Standing balance poses include things like warrior 3, half moon pose, eagle pose, which is a binding twisting pose, dancer pose, which is also a back bend in addition to a standing balance pose. And there are many other variations that you can work with as well. Tree pose, classic standing pose. Other categories of poses that you may try to include in the body of your practice would be arm balances or inversions. And although many of these are balance poses themselves, they really do get their own categories. Not every practice needs to include an inversion, and many practices don't include arm balances. But if you're really wanting to fill out your practice and you have enough time, consider adding a crow pose to your practice or a headstand. Or if you just want to keep it simple, you could take a legs up the wall or even just a legs in the air from the back to get yourself a nice little inversion where the blood moves the opposite direction in the legs of what it usually does. Although we've done back bends and twists and forward folds in the body of our practice and throughout, these actually are the 3 categories of poses that most often show up in the finishing poses. So back bends include things like bow pose, which is taken on our belly, camel pose, which is taken on our knees, and bridge or wheel pose, which we take from our back. After back bends, twists are a really great idea to help neutralize the spine. You can do a supine twist on your back. You can do a seated twist. And then forward folds are technically the counter pose to back bends, but oftentimes the twists come in between to transition from back bending to forward folding. Other things that you may want to include in your section of finishing poses would be things like hip openers or shoulder openers. Pigeon pose is a great example of this, and I know when I teach a yoga class, almost everybody is thrilled when we get to pigeon pose. A, because it's such a wonderful hip opening stretch that feels great after our bodies are really warm and we can really go deep. But B, it sometimes signals that we're almost to the end of practice, and that can be a really welcome feeling, especially if you've spent a fair amount of time in the body of your practice doing a lot of standing poses and maybe challenging yourself to some balancing variations. A practice could also have a focus. So you might choose to focus your practice on your core, and then you would do things like plank, side plank, boat pose. Anything that challenges you to stabilize through the center of the body could be a core focused practice. You can focus on your hips, and then maybe you would focus more on doing some lunges and some deep hip opening stretches at the end of your practice. You can focus on hamstrings or shoulders. And in any given day, you may feel like one of these things is the focus that you want. And this may actually be a good reason to create your own home yoga practice, because maybe the exact practice that you want just isn't out there on the internet today, and you intuitively know what your body needs. Well, you can create that practice. The structure of a yoga practice is going to allow you to have a complete practice that goes from warm-ups to the body of your practice, which includes standing poses, balance poses, potentially arm balances and inversions, and then moves to the finishing poses, making sure you incorporate some back bends, some twists, and some forward folds. That's going to give you a complete practice, but from there, you can choose which poses make most sense to you based on what your body needs and is craving for the day. Once you get to the end of the practice, I always encourage people to take Shavasana. I admit, when I'm done practicing, sometimes I just want to get up and move on with my day. But I do think it's really important to give yourself that time to really transition out of your practice with stillness. So come to your back, relax completely, close the eyes, let go of your Ujjayi breathing practice, but continue to focus your mind on your breath. Feel the weight of your body against the floor and really try to absorb and enjoy the stillness without checking out just yet. And then when your practice is done, you can go about the rest of your day. Choosing the length of your practice is really up to you. So if you're going to take a yoga class at a studio, chances are your class is going to be at least an hour long, maybe even longer. But that may not be realistic for you at home. So if you only have 20 minutes to practice, you can still incorporate all these components of the practice just in a shorter period of time. Yes, you're not going to be able to do all the poses. Less time means some things are going to go away. But you can still have a well-structured, complete practice in a short period of time if that's what suits you. And then on the days where you have a little bit more time, you can give yourself some more fun, playful variations and try out some things like inversions and arm balances that may not be able to make it to a practice that's only a short one. I hope this has been helpful for you. I wanted to go through a very brief practice and show you how you really can incorporate all the components of a basic yoga practice in a very short amount of time so that this is something that you can start to think about for yourself at home. So join me in this last part. We're going to go ahead and come to hands and knees and start with just a few cat-cow stretches. Now you may like to warm up your body from a seated position, and maybe it's helpful for you to check in with some stillness before your practice begins. But I know for some of us, if we're going to roll our mat out, we want to start moving right away, especially if we know we don't have a lot of time. So going into some cat-cow stretches gives you a chance to warm up your spine and connect to the breath. And because this is repetitive, we really don't have to think too hard about what we're doing. We can focus inward and prepare for our practice this way. And then from here, maybe a nice simple twist. Take the right leg out, take the right arm up, twist open, let the head fall back and breathe. Take the right hand down and the right knee down and just switch sides. Left leg out. Always want to make sure you're working symmetrically as you're practicing. And then coming back to center. And then maybe I want to check in with my core here and maybe practice a little bit of balance. So I'm going to reach my right arm out and left leg back, stabilizing through the center, and then hand and knee back to the floor. And then switch sides. Left arm, right leg. Anytime we're working balance, we are also working our core. So something like this is doing a little bit of both. And then from here, maybe walk the hands forward, and now we can really tune into our core with a plank pose. Tuck the toes, lift the knees and hips, reach the heels back. Try to level out hips and shoulders. Feel that strength that begins to develop in the center of the body. Your arms are also involved here, so feel the muscles wrapping around your arms. The legs tone up as well. So now our whole body is a little bit more involved. And then let's lower down. And maybe on this first one, knees go down first. But if you're feeling stronger, you can take a chaturanga early on. And then a little back bend. So maybe you want to just start with Sphinx pose, But maybe you're ready to go right into cobra pose. Shoulders back, heart forward, breathing. Try to relax the glutes. So focus on the part of the body you're working. Try not to strain in other places. And then we're gonna get to down dog, because if we wanna do a short practice, well, we gotta get there pretty quickly. And down dog is a great pose to warm up the legs. You can root into the hands and lift the hips. So our whole body really does get involved in this pose, but it's not too strenuous or challenging. Pedal through the feet here. And then from down dog, we can take the right leg up, warming it up. Maybe keep the hips square. If you want to open the hips and give yourself a stretch, go for it. And then look forward, step the right foot forward between the hands. We're going to build a little strength in the legs. We're coming to a standing pose here. We're going to take crescent, a high lunge. Reach through the back heel, reach the arms up. The legs are working. Although we're on both feet, this is a little bit of a balance challenge as well, so steady your gaze. And then take the left hand down and let's build in a twist. So this is really just a variation of our high lunge. Stack the shoulders. And then maybe you want to keep stabilizing through the core. From here, you could go right to a side plank just by rolling to the outer edge of your back foot and walking the right foot back. And a side plank is also going to be a great way to transition back to plank, and we can actually take a vinyasa to get back to down dog before we do the second side. So thinking a little ahead perhaps, even though you want to be focused on the pose that you're in. So now turn to the floor, lowering down. And because this is a short practice, maybe we just get into our full back bend now. So bend the knees, reach back with the hands for the tops of the feet. Give yourself a back bend. Although back bends are traditionally finishing poses, we want to do them when we're a little bit warm. If we're not going to be practicing for very long, we are almost near the end of the practice, even though we've just began. And then let that go. Take the hands to the mat, push back into cobra and downward facing dog. Take the left leg up. Square hip or open hip, but try to do the same thing you did on the first side. And then look forward between the hands, step that left foot up, and we're going to do the high lunge again. So we want to work both legs, knee over ankle. So checking in with your own alignment here. If you are, if you've practiced yoga before, doing your own home yoga practice means you just kind of have to rely on your own memory of what teachers tell you about alignment and what your body is telling you as well. Take the right hand down to the floor, take the left arm up, twist open. And then we can take that side plank again on the other side. Find your transition. Lift the hips. And then turn to the floor. We're back in plank. And we could take another vinyasa here. Take a back bend. You can take a bridge or, you can take a cobra, or you can take another bow if you want to. And then downward facing dog. And then let's walk the feet forward and take a forward fold. So we haven't really even done a standing forward fold yet. Allow yourself to just hang here, dangling. So forward folds can be finishing poses, but when we're on our feet, generally a forward fold is a standing pose. Let's go ahead and roll up. And now let's take a nice wide-legged forward fold. So step the feet out wide, and we can take Prostrate Padottanasana here. So again, most poses are a combination. This one, both a standing pose and a forward fold. Folding down, hands to the floor, lean your weight forward. And then press the feet into the floor, come on up. And from here, we can do a little bit of standing pose practice. So turning the right toes open, front heel and back arch line up. Maybe we take triangle. I'm gonna take warrior two today. And again, if you don't have a long time for much practice, you're not gonna be able to do all of the standing poses, but choose one that feels right for you. And that's obviously a personal choice. So if you really love triangle pose, why not take the pose you love? On the other hand, if you feel really challenged by a particular pose, maybe that's the one you want to choose. And from here, we're actually going to move into a balance pose because I think it's great to throw in a balance pose, even if it is a short practice. We're going to reverse warrior, and then we're going to move into half moon pose. So reaching the right fingers forward, float the back leg up. You could use a block or something underneath your hand if you need to, but just give yourself a chance to work being on one foot and extending the limbs in opposite directions. Make sure you're breathing and giving yourself enough time in the balance pose that your body feels like it's really come to stability. And then to come out, just bend that front knee. And we can just twist the feet around. So if you're doing a longer practice, you might want to transition through a vinyasa. But if your practice is just going to be for a short time, just let yourself go from one side to the other side. Arms out. Let's take warrior two. Looking out over those left fingertips. Give yourself several breaths in each pose. I think 5 breaths is probably a good medium amount of breaths. You can hold longer, but try not to hold just like one breath unless you're flowing and really moving from breath to breath, from pose to pose. And then reverse your warrior for just a breath, and then we're gonna go into our half moon pose. And so we'll try to hold here for about 5 breaths. And then step back, come on up. Let's take the feet, turn the toes out, and maybe we do actually want to take a little arm balance practice today. So coming to a squat, knees over toes, take the arms inside the knees, press the palms. And if we don't have a ton of time, then we want to just see what happens. Just give our body a chance to try it, and then just move on. Don't overthink it. Upper arms inside shins, hands to the floor, just lean in. And if you can get to a crow and hold for 5 breaths, great. But if it's just a practice for you today, don't worry. Just spend as much time as feels right and then move on when you're ready. And then when your body comes down, it comes down, right? And then let's take a boat pose. So boat pose is a balance pose, but it's also a core pose. And as we're starting to come closer to the mat, we're thinking, okay, well, we're about to go into some finishing poses here, but let's take this one last strengthening pose. And then feet to the floor. Let's take the right leg out and we can do a nice twist. So we did a back bend earlier. We did do our bow pose, but if you had a little more time, maybe you would want to take like a camel pose or come to your back and do a bridge or a wheel. But if you had enough back bending from then, let's just go into a twist here. So using your right arm around the left knee, turn over the left shoulder. And let's go ahead and switch sides. So left leg out, right leg steps over. So you can see that even in this very short practice, we did some warm-ups. We did some cat-cow and a twist and a little bit of core connecting. We did the center of our practice, which was pretty much just our warrior two poses, although we did also do a high lunge and a side plank in there. And now we're just doing a few finishing poses to kind of complete our practice. Now from here, we can take a forward fold. Maybe Jani Shirshasana, maybe we take one leg at a time, or if we want to get both legs at the same time, we can take Paschimottanasana. So reaching the arms out and up, a forward fold is a great way to finish a yoga practice. Forward folds are designed to be calming and move our focus inward. The other advantage of taking a forward fold at the end of your practice is that your hamstrings are going to be warmer, so maybe more flexible. It's the right time to try to stretch them. And then come on up carefully. And then you can finish your practice with a short Shavasana, or you can just come to a seated position, bring your palms together, and just give yourself a moment to really close. So you can see that even in this really short practice, we had the three parts: a warm-up, the body of the practice, short as it was, and then finishing poses. And then we also included all the category of poses. So we had standing poses, we had crescent pose, we had Prasarita Padottanasana, and we had warrior two. We had balance poses, we did our half moon pose, and we also did boat pose, which is a balance pose. Now we didn't take an inversion practice today, but again, that doesn't need to be in every practice. We did do an arm balance, we did crow pose. We did a back bend, so we did a little bow pose. We did a twist, we did a seated twist, and we did a forward fold. We finished with Paschimottanasana. So although the practice was short, it is complete because it has those components. And that is a structure that you could follow if you are trying to create your own home yoga practice. I hope this has been helpful to you. Please let me know in the comments if you liked this, if it was useful, if you have any additional questions, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel. The next part of this short series is going to be sequencing, where I'll talk a little bit more about how you can think about getting from one pose to another and transitions, and how you can make that really fun for yourself and a little bit creative. All right, thanks so much for joining me. The light in me recognizes and honors the light in you. Namaste.